"I want to be a father," what the Lakota scout said shocked her. The caravan moved slowly across the wide land, wheels creaking, horses breathing hard under the sun. Dust rose in soft clouds behind every step. The young woman rode near the middle, close enough to hear orders but far enough to stay out of the way. She was there to write things down: routes, supplies, small notes for officers who did not want to remember details themselves. It was not a job she dreamed of, but it paid, and it allowed her to see places most women never saw. She had learned early to observe quietly, to listen more than speak. Men often forgot she was there, and that gave her freedom. She watched how people behaved when they thought no one important was paying attention. She wrote carefully at night by the light of a small lamp, recording facts and moments that felt larger than facts. On the third day after leaving the last fort, she noticed him. He rode ahead of the caravan, not with the soldiers, but not apart either. His horse moved easily, as if the land itself guided its steps. He did not wear a uniform, yet the officers listened when he spoke. When he lifted his hand, the caravan slowed. When he turned his head, scouts followed his gaze. He said little, but his presence was steady, like a tree that had stood through many storms. Someone whispered that he was Lakota. A scout. She expected to see anger in him, or fear, or at least tension. Instead, his face was calm. His eyes watched the hills and the sky more than the people. He did his work without seeking praise. He was not guarded, yet not open either. He existed in a space that made her unsure where he truly stood. That uncertainty stayed with her. At the next stop, as the caravan rested near a shallow stream, she stepped down to refill water. The horses were restless, stamping and shaking their heads. She knelt by the water, dipping her canteen, when she felt a presence nearby. Not threatening, just there. She looked up and saw him standing a few steps away. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt thick, not with danger, but with awareness. He nodded once, polite but distant, then moved past her toward the horses. That was all. Yet her heart beat faster than it should have. That night she found herself writing his description instead of supply numbers. She crossed it out, annoyed with herself, then rewrote it in smaller letters. She told herself it was only observation. That was her job. The days that followed were long. Heat during the day, cold winds at night. The land stretched wide and open, making everyone feel small. Tempers grew short. One wagon lost a wheel. Another mule went lame. The officers argued. The scout said nothing, but he adjusted their path, quietly avoiding low ground and sharp rock. She watched how he interacted with the land. He did not rush. He did not fight it. He seemed to listen, as if the earth spoke in ways others had forgotten how to hear. It made her think about how often people tried to control things that could not be controlled. On the sixth evening, the caravan stopped earlier than usual. Dark clouds gathered in the distance. The scout spoke briefly to the lead officer, pointing toward a line of trees. The order came quickly: make camp there. Rain arrived just after sunset. People rushed, tying ropes, covering supplies. The woman struggled with a loose canvas, her fingers slipping as water poured down. Before she could call for help, hands appeared beside hers, steady and strong. Together, they pulled the canvas tight. "Thank you," she said, surprised by how small her voice sounded. He nodded. "Storm will pass by morning." His voice was calm, low, and certain. She realized it was the first time she had heard him speak directly to her. "How do you know?" she asked. He glanced towards the sky. "Wind tells you if you listen." She smiled despite herself. "I've never been very good at listening to the wind." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if deciding whether her words were worth answering. "Most people aren't," he said. Then he stepped away. The rain lasted through the night. She lay awake, listening to it drum against the canvas, thinking about how easily he read signs she never noticed. In the morning, the land smelled clean and new. He had been right. The storm was gone. From that day on, small conversations began to happen. Not often, not long. A question about water, a comment about the trail, a quiet warning about weather. Each exchange felt simple yet meaningful, like stones placed carefully along a path. She learned that he'd noticed details others missed. A broken branch, a change in bird calls, a shift in the air. He learned that she wrote things down not just as duty, but as memory. He once saw her rereading her notes and asked why. "So I don't forget," she said. He considered that. "Some things live without writing." She nodded. "Some things disappear if we don't." He did not argue. That surprised her. One afternoon, a young soldier mocked him under his breath, thinking no one heard. The scout ignored it. The woman felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. She said nothing, but she watched how the scout kept walking, unchanged, his dignity untouched by the insult. It struck her then how much strength it took not to react. That night, by the fire, she watched him sit apart carving something small from wood. She could not see what it was. The firelight touched his hands, careful and patient. She wanted to ask what he was making, but feared breaking the quiet. Instead, she listened. The sounds of the camp surrounded them. Low voices, crackling wood, distant animals. The world felt large and small at the same time. She wondered how many nights like this he had known. How many journeys, how many endings and beginnings. She realized she knew nothing about his past. Not his family. Not where he came from. Not what he had lost. And yet she felt as though she was learning something important just by watching him exist in this space. The caravan would not last forever. She knew that. Soon they would reach their destination, and everyone would go their separate ways. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. As she lay down to sleep, she understood that this meeting, this quiet crossing of lives, was not dramatic or loud. No great event had happened. And yet, something had shifted. A door had opened, just slightly. She did not know what would come next, but she knew she would remember the Lakota scout who walked ahead of them, reading the land like a story written long before any of them arrived. The days after the storm felt different, as if the land itself had slowed its breathing. The caravan moved forward with fewer complaints. The air was cooler, the sky clearer. People spoke in softer voices, tired but steady. The young woman noticed how often her eyes drifted toward the front now, toward the scout riding ahead. She did not try to make this happen. It simply did. Whenever the path narrowed or curved, she watched how he guided the group without raising his voice. He pointed, nodded, sometimes lifted a hand. That was enough. The officers trusted him more than they admitted. The soldiers followed, because the land demanded it. One afternoon, the caravan paused near a rocky slope. The officers argued over whether to go around it or cut through a narrow pass. Voices rose. Tempers flared. The scout waited until the noise burned itself out. Then he spoke, calm and even. "The pass floods when the sun drops," he said. "Stone sweats. Water falls." Someone laughed, not kindly. "Stone doesn't sweat." The scout met the man's eyes. "Walk there at dusk if you wish." No one did. They took the longer route. The woman wrote this down later, not as a joke, but as a truth. She had learned that language did not always need to convince. Sometimes it only needed to state what already was. That evening the camp was quieter. People were tired. Fires burned low. She finished her work early and sat alone, wrapping her blanket tighter as the air cooled. Across the camp she saw the scout again, sitting near a small fire, alone as usual. She hesitated, then stood. Her steps felt louder than they should have. Gravel shifted beneath her boots. He looked up before she reached him, as if he had heard her coming long ago. "May I sit?" she asked. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. They sat on opposite sides of the fire. The flames moved between them, rising and falling, making shadows dance across his face. For a while neither spoke. The silence was not heavy. It felt aloud.
"You were right about the pass," she said finally.
"I usually am," he replied, without pride. She smiled. "I've noticed." He picked up a stick and adjusted the fire. Sparks lifted into the dark. "You write everything," he said. "Not everything. Enough." She considered denying it, then didn't. "It helps me understand things." "Does it?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes it only helps me remember what I didn't understand at the time." He nodded once, as if this answer satisfied him. She watched his hands as he worked with the fire. They were strong, but careful. Hands that knew how to fix, not just break. The thought surprised her. "Why do you travel with them?" she asked, surprising herself even more. He did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on the flames. "Because the land must be crossed," he said slowly. "If they cross without listening, many will not return. That sounds like duty." "It is," he said. Then, after a pause, "and choice." She wanted to ask more, but she sensed the edge of his patience. Some doors were not meant to be pushed open. The next few nights followed a pattern. She sat with him by the fire. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. When they did, it was about small things. The shape of clouds, the way animals moved before weather changed, the sound of trees at night. Once she asked how he learned these things. "From those who came before me," he said. "From watching, from mistakes." "Did they teach you with words?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "mostly with silence." She laughed softly. "That explains a lot." He glanced at her, curious. "You fear silence." She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it. "I think I do," she said honestly. "Why?" "Because silence leaves space," she said. "And space lets thoughts grow." "That is not always bad." "No," she said. "But it can be uncomfortable." He seemed to think about that. Growth often is. One evening, a child from the caravan wandered too close to the edge of camp. A steep drop waited just beyond the rocks. Before any adult noticed, the scout stood, crossed the distance in long strides, and gently lifted the child away from danger. He spoke softly, guiding the child back to their mother, who clutched the child tightly, shaken and grateful. The scout said nothing more and returned to his place by the fire. The woman could not stop thinking about it. Later that night she asked, "Do you have children?" He looked surprised by the question, not offended, just caught off guard. "No," he said. "You handled that like you were used to it." He stared into the fire again. "Some skills are learned by watching," he said. "Some by wanting." She did not press him, but the word stayed with her. Wanting. The journey grew harder as they moved farther from familiar paths. Food had to be measured. Water watched carefully. One day a wagon axle cracked. While others argued, the scout knelt, examined it, and began directing repairs. He worked beside the soldiers, not above them, not beneath them, simply present. She saw how his calm steadied everyone else. Panic had no place to grow near him. That night, she wrote later than usual. Her words drifted away from numbers and distances. She caught herself describing feelings, moments, the way trust formed quietly, without ceremony. She paused, then kept writing. Another night, as they sat together, she asked, "Do you ever wish you were somewhere else?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Where? Where my choices would not be questioned," he said. "Where my voice would not surprise people." She felt a sting of shame, though she did not fully understand why. "Your voice doesn't surprise me anymore." "That is because you have learned to listen," he said. She held that like a gift. The fire burned low. The camp settled into sleep. In the distance, an animal called out, lonely but steady. The scout looked toward the sound, then back at the fire. "You see much," he said to her.
"You do too. I see what is," he said.
"You see what it means," she smiled. "I don't always get it right, neither do I." That shared admission felt important. As she lay down that night, wrapped in her blanket, she understood that this part of the journey was not about distance traveled. It was about something quieter. Trust building, slowly. Understanding forming, piece by piece. And she sensed that whatever he had not yet said whatever he carried inside, was moving closer to the surface. She did not know when it would emerge. Only that when it did, it would matter. The sun was low, spreading long shadows across the wide-open plains. The caravan moved slower than usual, the horses stepping carefully over uneven ground. The young woman walked beside her wagon, her notebook tucked under her arm, thinking about the scout and the quiet way he moved through the land. She had spent weeks observing him, learning from his silence and small gestures, and yet there was still so much she did not know. Every detail about him seemed layered with meaning she could only guess at. That afternoon the wind picked up, bringing a chill that made the travelers pull their cloaks tighter. The scout rode ahead as usual, scanning the horizon with a steady gaze. She noticed how his hands rested on the reins, relaxed yet alert. There was no hurry in his movements, but every motion was precise. He did not waste energy. The young woman thought about how different that was from the soldiers, who often rushed, tripped, or argued over small decisions. As they approached a small river, the caravan halted. Some of the wagons had to be lowered carefully down the bank, while the animals were guided across the shallow water. It was slow work. People grumbled, but the scout did not. He simply moved among them, pointing to firm spots, suggesting how to guide the wheel safely, sometimes demonstrating by taking the first step himself. The soldiers noticed, followed his directions, and soon, one by one, the wagons crossed safely. The young woman could not help watching him. Even in moments of tension, he seemed unshakable. She felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. One small gesture, the tilt of his head or the calm in his voice, carried lessons she was only beginning to understand. She wanted to speak to him more, to ask about his thoughts and experiences, but she did not know where to start. There were boundaries, invisible but strong, and she was not certain she should cross them. That evening, the camp settled along the riverbank. Fires were lit, horses fed, and water barrels refilled. People moved in patterns they had followed for days, preparing food, patching broken wheels, checking maps, and exchanging tired stories. The young woman found a quiet spot near the edge of camp, hoping for a moment of peace. To her surprise, she found the scout already there, sitting on a large flat rock, his eyes fixed on the water's surface. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "May I sit?" she asked softly. The question felt smaller than it should have. There was no ceremony, only curiosity. He glanced at her, then nodded. "Yes," he said simply. She lowered herself onto the ground beside him, careful not to disturb the quiet. For a long while they watched the river flow. The sunlight shimmered on its surface, creating patterns that moved and changed with each ripple. The only sounds were the water, the occasional clink of tools from the camp, and the wind through the trees. After some time, she spoke. "Do you ever wonder what life would be like somewhere else?" The words came hesitantly. She was testing the waters, trying to reach into a part of him he rarely shared. He did not answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the river. Then he said slowly, "I think about it. Sometimes I wish I could be in a place where my choices were my own, where my life was not defined by what others expected." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. There was no complaint, only honesty. She felt the weight of those words. They carried more than he said. "I think about that too," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if the paths we choose are really ours, or if they are just what the world expects of us." He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. "The world is heavy," he said. "It asks much from those who follow it, and yet some choose anyway." She nodded, understanding more than she could explain. For weeks she had observed him navigate that weight, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the quiet patience he carried. It all made sense now. He had chosen, even in the face of a world that could be cruel, chaotic, and unkind. Then, without warning, he spoke words that stopped her in her tracks. "I want to be a father." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like he had been holding the thought for a long time, and now it had to be said.
She blinked, caught off guard. She had expected him to talk about the land, about duty, about survival.
But this? It was different. She did not know how to respond. She only stared, listening to the river, to the wind, to the weight of his words. He did not look embarrassed, though. There was no hesitation in his eyes. He continued quietly. Not just in name, not just in duty. I want to raise someone, to teach them, to guide them, to protect a future that might not exist otherwise. That is the path I wish to take. Her heart beat faster. She could not move, could not speak. The words were simple, yet powerful. She realized in that moment how rarely she had heard anyone speak about fatherhood, not as obligation, not as a duty, but as a calling, a purpose. It was intimate and brave, and it changed how she saw him entirely. The river flowed between them, its water moving endlessly, carrying away their small words, leaving only understanding behind. She found her voice, finally.
That is beautiful, she whispered.
And rare, he nodded, but did not add more. Some things, he seemed to say, did not need explanation. Some desires were strong enough to stand on their own. The night deepened around them. Stars appeared one by one, silent witnesses to the conversation. Fires in the camp burned low. In that quiet, the young woman thought about her own life, about the dreams she had not spoken aloud, about the ways the world limited her, the ways she had limited herself. And she realized that hearing someone speak of hope so simply could be its own kind of courage. They sat together until the camp quieted completely. No one else approached. No one needed to. The presence of another human being, fully honest and fully visible, was enough. She felt both humbled and inspired. She did not know what the future held for the scout, or for her, but she knew this night would stay with her forever. As the night deepened, she asked a question she had feared for weeks. Have you always wanted this? To be a father? He thought for a long time. His eyes were fixed on the stars. Not always, he said finally. But I have seen the world, and I have seen what is missing. And I know that one day, if I am able, I want to create something good. Something lasting, someone to guide, someone to love. She felt tears prick her eyes. Not sadness, but understanding. She saw how his calm authority, his quiet observation, his careful patience. It all made sense now. This desire to be a father was not a whim. It was the thread that ran through all he did, all he had done. Protecting the caravan, guiding the horses, weeding the land. These were small acts of the same intention. I think that anyone would be lucky to have you as a father, she said softly. He glanced at her, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. And anyone would be lucky to be understood, he said. They fell silent again, watching the river and the stars. The young woman thought about how rare it was to encounter someone so honest, so steady, and so quietly brave. The scout had spoken a truth that would not fade. She felt that truth settle deep inside her, a reminder of the strength it took to admit hope, to hold it carefully, and to act upon it when the world might not support you. The next morning the caravan moved again. People were restless, horses impatient. The scout took his place ahead as usual. She followed the wagons, her notebook in hand, her mind full of the previous night's conversation. She realized she looked at him differently now, not just as a guide, not just as a scout, not just as a man navigating the land, but as someone whose intentions carried weight beyond survival, beyond duty. He carried hope. He carried life. Throughout the day she watched him. The way he adjusted the path for the wagons, the way he spoke to the soldiers, the way he observed the land. Everything was tied to his desire to protect, to nurture, to guide. Each small choice was a reflection of something larger, something quietly powerful. She realized that sometimes the greatest strength was not in force or speed or command. It was in care, in patience, in the intention to create good in a world that often offered none. By evening the camp was set again. Fires glowed, the smell of food drifted through the air, and people settled into familiar routines. She found a spot near the river, notebook ready, but her thoughts were not for writing this time. They were for remembering, for understanding, for carrying the words he had spoken with her. "I want to be a father," she whispered to herself. She closed her eyes and imagined the weight of those words, the courage it took to say them, and the hope they carried. It was a lesson she would not forget, a lesson about honesty, about bravery, about the quiet power of intention. And in that moment she knew that the journey was no longer only about distance traveled or supplies counted. It was about trust, understanding, and the rare moments when a human heart reveals itself in truth. The scout had shared something profound, something that could not be undone, and it had changed her forever. The journey continued, but a heaviness had settled over the caravan that the young woman could not ignore. The further they moved into unknown territory, the more she noticed the tension in the soldiers' movements, the sharpness in the officers' voices, and the subtle unease that seemed to hang in the air. Even the animals were restless, their ears flicking at invisible sounds, their hooves dragging a little more carefully over the rocky paths. The scout remained as steady as ever, riding ahead, scanning the land, and guiding the caravan with quiet authority. Yet she began to notice small signs that even he carried burdens she could not see. His shoulders sometimes tensed when the path narrowed. His eyes lingered on distant hills with a thoughtful shadow. Once she saw him pause by a tree and touch its bark, as if seeking reassurance from the land itself. She wanted to speak to him, to ask if he felt fear, but she hesitated. She sensed that some things he carried were private, and pressing might not be wise. Still, her curiosity would not be contained. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high and the dust rose around the wagons, an argument broke out between two soldiers. Words escalated quickly, voices sharp and accusing. The young woman felt her stomach tighten. She knew from experience that such fights could spiral into chaos, especially when tempers were already frayed. The scout approached without haste, moving as if the world around him existed only to be understood. He did not raise his voice. He did not push. He stood between the men, calm and silent, waiting. When he finally spoke, it was so quietly that she almost missed it. "Your path ends where the land refuses. Choose your steps with care." The words were simple, almost like a warning from the wind or the river, yet they had the power to stop the fight. The men looked at each other, then at him, and slowly, tension eased. The scout nodded once, turned, and walked away. The soldiers followed his lead without further argument. The young woman stared, amazed. She realized again how much strength there was in quietness, in restraint, in speaking only when necessary. There was no anger in him, no desire for control, only a firm understanding of the world and a commitment to guide others safely through it. That evening, as the camp settled along the edge of a wooded area, she noticed the scout sitting apart from the others, carving something small from a piece of wood. The firelight danced across his hands, steady and precise. She approached, drawn by curiosity. "What are you making?" she asked softly. He looked up, surprised by her question, then smiled faintly. "Something that reminds me of home," he said. "Home?" she repeated, intrigued. "Is this place not home?" He shook his head slowly. "Home is more than land. It is people, stories, and choices we make for those we love. This reminds me of what I wish to build someday." She sensed the weight in his words. He had spoken about fatherhood before, but now it was clear that this desire shaped every part of his life. Even in the smallest actions, he was practicing care, responsibility, and patience. "Do you ever fear you won't get the chance?" she asked gently. His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "Fear comes and goes, but hope stays." He paused, then added quietly, "I must believe that some good can exist, even in a world that often forgets it." She nodded, feeling a mix of admiration and sorrow. It was rare to meet someone so brave, so aware, and so willing to carry hope despite knowing how easily it could be taken away. The following days brought more challenges. A sudden storm forced the caravan to find shelter in a narrow valley. The ground turned to mud, and the wagon struggled to move. The soldiers grew frustrated, voices raised, and fatigue showed in every step. The young woman noticed that the scout did not complain. He walked along the wagons, guiding the animals, adjusting the wheels, and finding firm footing where others saw only danger. One moment, a wagon tipped dangerously close to a steep bank. The young woman gasped, thinking it would fall, but the scout moved instantly. With careful strength, he steadied the wagon, guiding the soldiers to adjust the ropes and balance. No words were shouted, no blame assigned. The task was completed with quiet determination, and the wagon was saved. She realized that this was who he was. Not just a guide, not just a scout, but someone who carried responsibility as naturally as breathing. He protected not only the physical journey, but also the lives and hopes of those around him. That night the storm passed, leaving the land wet and shining under a full moon. The young woman walked to the edge of camp, notebook in hand, but she did not write. Instead, she watched the scout sitting by a small fire, his gaze on the river, hands folded in his lap. "I've seen so much," she said softly, almost to herself. He glanced at her, expression calm. "And yet there is more to see." "You make it seem easy," she admitted. He shook his head. "It is never easy. But it is necessary. Some things, people, responsibilities, hope, must be carried even when the path is hard." She thought of his words about wanting to be a father, about hope and choice. She began to understand that his calm, his patience, and his courage all stemmed from this deep purpose. He lived as if preparing for something greater than himself, even in moments when others could not see it. As the days passed, the young woman began to notice small details that had previously escaped her. How he helped a young soldier with a splinter without making him feel weak. How he treated the horses with care, ensuring none were overworked. How he listened to the wind, the trees, the land, as if the world itself spoke to him, giving advice to those who could hear. One evening, she approached him while he was tending the fire. "Do you ever feel that the world is against you?" she asked cautiously.
He considered the question.
"Sometimes, but the world is not always against us. It is the people who forget to see. And the land? The land teaches if we listen. We must learn from it, not fight it." She nodded, reflecting on how often she had thought the world was cruel or unfair. Perhaps it was not cruelty but indifference, and that was something different, something she could understand. As the camp settled that night, the young woman noticed a faint shadow cross the scout's face, a momentary pause, a hesitation she had not seen before. She wondered what he was thinking. He had spoken of hope, of choice, of fatherhood, but she now realized there were limits to what he could control. Forces beyond him, beyond the caravan, beyond even the land itself, could take away what he hoped to protect. The thought made her heart ache. She had not realized how fragile some dreams could be until now. Yet she also felt admiration for his determination. To hope, to want, to carry intention in a world that often crushed it. That was bravery of a quiet kind. The next morning, the caravan moved again. The path was narrower, the rocks sharper, the soldiers were tense. One mule lost its footing and slipped, and the officer in charge shouted in frustration. The scout moved immediately, steadying the animal and directing others calmly. There was no anger, only action. The young woman followed him with her eyes, realizing that every act of guidance, every word spoken or left unsaid, was tied to his desire to protect, to build, to nurture. His hope of fatherhood, she realized, was not idle. It had already shaped the way he lived, the way he guided, and the way he carried himself through danger and fatigue.
Later that day, as they crossed a shallow river, she saw him help a child who had wandered too close to the water's edge.
His hands were gentle but firm. His words were soft, guiding the child back to safety. She felt a quiet awe. Every action, every choice, every careful movement seemed to prepare him, in small ways, for the role he desired so deeply. That night she sat beside him by the fire, not speaking, just watching the flames. The stars reflected on the water. The fire flickered across his calm face. She felt a mix of hope and sorrow. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if he would ever have the chance to be a father. but she knew that the desire itself had given him a strength that few others possessed. "Do you think dreams survive this world?" she asked finally. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Dreams survive if we carry them carefully, if we act with care, with purpose, and with hope. Some things must be protected even when others do not see them." She nodded. She understood now that the journey was not only about travel or distance or survival. It was about learning, about observing, about carrying intentions and values quietly but firmly. And she realized that she had been learning from him, whether he knew it or not. That night, as she lay under her blanket listening to the river and the distant night sounds, she understood something essential. Life would take its toll. The world could challenge, interrupt, or even erase the plans we held dear. But the courage to hope, the patience to carry purpose, and the intention to protect, these were unbreakable. And she understood more clearly than ever why he wanted to be a father. It was not only for the future child, it was for the world, for the land, for the people who might one day need guidance. His hope was a quiet form of resistance against chaos. It was the way he lived, the way he loved, and the way he moved through life. And for the first time she realized that hope, when acted upon, was a force as strong as courage, as steady as the land, and as essential as the air they breathed. The caravan moved slower now, as if the land itself wanted them to notice each step. The young woman walked along the dusty road, her notebook in her hand, though she had written very little that day. Words seemed unnecessary. The moments, the faces, the quiet strength of the scout, those could not be captured on paper. They had to be felt. She noticed the scout riding ahead, his posture steady, his eyes on the horizon. He seemed unchanged, but she knew better. She could see the small tension in his shoulders, the careful way he measured each movement. The journey had grown harder. The land was less forgiving. Obstacles appeared suddenly. Fallen trees, rocky slopes, and narrow passes that tested the limits of the wagons. The soldiers were tense, voices louder, hands quicker to anger, and yet the scout remained calm. He moved among them, adjusting the path, guiding the horses, quietly solving problems before anyone else realized they existed. The young woman could not help but admire him. Every action he took seemed to carry purpose beyond the present moment, as though each step was a preparation for something larger, something unseen. She remembered his words about wanting to be a father, and she realized that desire had shaped every part of him, every careful, patient motion, every quiet choice. One afternoon, a wagon wheel cracked as the caravan climbed a steep incline. The officer in charge shouted frustrated, and some of the soldiers began arguing over how to fix it. The young woman's heart beat quickly, expecting chaos. But the scout stepped forward. He examined the wheel carefully, touching the wood and metal as if feeling its story. Then, without raising his voice, he gave instructions. Lift here, shift weight there. Slow, steady. Everyone together. The soldiers obeyed, their movements following his rhythm. The wheel was repaired without damage, and the wagon continued its climb. The young woman watched, amazed at the quiet authority he commanded. He did not demand respect. He earned it with calm and care. She thought of how rare such people were, those who could lead without force, who could protect without anger. That night, she approached him while the camp was quiet. The fires glowed low, casting long shadows across the ground. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what becomes of us after this journey?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "Life moves forward, with or without our permission. Some paths end, some continue. But what matters is how we walk them, how we carry ourselves, and what we leave behind." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "And what do you hope to leave behind?" He stared at the fire, thoughtful. A future, something good. Someone to guide, someone to teach, someone to love. The young woman remembered his words from weeks before. "I want to be a father." The simplicity of it, the honesty, the courage, it had never left her mind. And now she saw that it was more than a dream. It was a guiding principle, a force shaping everything he did. Days passed, and the caravan approached the edge of their destination. The land opened into a wide valley, green and full of life after the long, harsh trails. The soldiers relaxed slightly, voices softer, movements slower. The young woman noticed the scout pause, his eyes sweeping the valley, taking it all in. He breathed deeply, as if the land itself had acknowledged his passage. That evening, the camp settled for the last night before the caravan would disperse. Fires burned brightly, and people moved with a mixture of relief and fatigue. The young woman found a quiet spot by a tree watching the scout. He was carving something small, his hands steady, his face calm. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them glow with quiet determination. She approached him. "Will you keep traveling after this?" she asked. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Some paths continue, some end. But what matters is the purpose we carry." "And your purpose?" she asked softly. He paused, thinking. Then he smiled faintly. "To protect, to guide, to prepare for what may come, and to hope." She nodded, understanding more than she could explain. His hope was not idle. It was alive, shaping his every action, every choice, every careful step he took through a world that could be cruel and unkind. The night passed quietly. Stars filled the sky, mirrored by the river that flowed gently through the valley. The young woman lay awake, thinking of the journey, of the scout, of the lessons she had learned. She realized that the world could be harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Yet courage, hope, and care could create small lights in the darkness, lights that mattered more than any command, any weapon, or any order. Morning came, and the caravan prepared to leave. The wagons would go in different directions, the soldiers would disperse, and the young woman would continue her own path. She watched the scout one last time, his figure steady against the rising sun. She wanted to ask where he would go next, but the words felt unnecessary. Some stories were not meant to be followed step by step. Some truths simply needed to exist. Before she left, she spoke softly. "Will you ever get the chance to be a father?" He paused, looking at her with calm eyes. "Perhaps," he said, "if the world allows it, and if I carry hope carefully enough, perhaps I will." She smiled faintly, knowing that his hope, whether realized or not, had already changed her. The desire to protect, to guide, and to love had been alive in him for weeks, shaping the journey, shaping the people around him, shaping her understanding of courage and care. As the caravan moved forward, she turned to look back one last time. The scout was still there, standing quietly, observing the land. He did not wave, he did not speak, but she felt the weight of his presence, the strength of his hope, and the power of his quiet courage. Years later, she would think of that journey often. She would remember the wide plains, the storms, the rivers, and the quiet hands that guided so many safely. She would remember the scout who spoke of fatherhood not as a duty, but as a calling, a purpose, and a hope. And she would carry his lesson with her. That courage is not always loud, that leadership is not always visible, and that hope, when held carefully, can survive even the harshest journeys. She would raise her own family one day, teaching them what she had learned, to listen, to observe, to protect, and to hope. And in her heart she would remember the man who had quietly shown her that some truths, once spoken, could change a life forever. The story did not end with certainty. The scout's path remained unknown, his future uncertain. But his words, his actions, and his hope remained alive in her memory, a quiet force shaping her understanding of life, love, and the courage it takes to dream in a world that often tries to limit dreams. Even as the years passed, she would find herself thinking, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud, "I want to be a father." And she would remember the calm, steady voice, the gentle hands, and the patient eyes that had spoken that truth into the world. And in that remembrance she would find inspiration, courage, and hope for herself, for her children, and for the future. The journey was over, but the lessons lived on, and she knew with quiet certainty that some acts of hope are stronger than any distance, any obstacle, or any fear.